My name is Dan Abnett, and I am a writer, professional writer. I have been a writer for years, quite a long time. Some people may know me from writing comic books. I've written comics for DC and Marvel, just about every company you can think of. And I still do that, and it's a great love of mine. I just love working in the comics medium. I also write novels, so some people know me as a novelist. I've written 53 novels, most of which are tie-in fiction, so Doctor Who, Torchwood, Primeval, Marvel superheroes, and an awful lot of Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 novels, which, again, a lot of people know me for. I also write games, so that's my sort of the least known part of what I do. The last 10 years or so, have been hired to write either the whole storyline of games or chatter and dialogue for games. So the most notable ones of those you might know of are Alien Isolation, which I wrote the main story for, and if you play, hands up who's played Shadow of Mordor, either the first or second one. If you like the orcs, they were my fault. I had to create the individual orc characters and write, I think for the first game it was 60,000 lines of dialogue, having created 60 orcs, so that all the different variables could be met in the course of the game, because the game remembers that the orcs in the game, if you've played it, the orcs remember who you are, so they can say specific things to you as you go on, so it binds you into the story. It's a very clever system. So I had to write all that. So yeah, I do a lot. The reason we called this session Moving Between Universes is because I do a lot of stuff, and I visit, in the course of my work, an awful lot of universes. I can spend the morning in the Marvel universe and end up in the afternoon in, I don't know, Mega City 1 with Judge Dredd, and then the following day I can be in, I don't know, Middle-earth, and by the afternoon I'm possibly somewhere in the vicinity of the Guardians of the Galaxy, or whatever it is. And I've written for a long time, and I know that suits me. That is to say, that as a writer, I've discovered that I produce my best work by being slightly too busy. If I've got slightly too many things going on, I've got a constant background level of stress and pressure, not in an unhealthy way, but it just keeps me motivated to produce more stories. Whereas on the few occasions where I've gone, I've only got one job to do this week, I can take my time and lavish care and attention on it, it's terrible. It's just, you know, the work expands to fill the time available. So if you put yourself under pressure, and the other thing I've discovered is I love the genre. I love science fiction and fantasy. I love you'd be hard pressed to find something in the realms of science fiction, fantasy, games that I don't like. But if you work on any of them for too long, it can become repetitively boring, just simply because of your sort of immersion in that thing. So I also like to have too much work going on and move between universes, to literally spend the morning writing a chapter of my latest book, and then the afternoon writing a script for DC, and then the following day writing a script for 2000 AD or something like that, so that I never stay put. Everything's new and exciting, and I find that invigorates me and keeps me, I was going to say sane, and I don't think that's probably the best word to use. It keeps me inspired to produce stories. And that's what I do. That's how I fill my time, and I like it very much. As I say, I started out in comics. I started out in comics accidentally. I've always liked comics. From about the age of 8 or 9 years old, I first discovered Marvel comics. Those were the comics, the American comics that I could get where I live in the UK. And I almost immediately, my two favourite things to do was to write stories and draw pictures. They were my two favourite hobbies. So when I discovered comics, I realised I could do both of those things at the same time. So I would spend my childhood writing and drawing my own comics. Never expecting that to lead me to any kind of professional fulfillment. And when I left university, having got a degree in English, I didn't know what to do. And somebody said, oh, you like comics, you should get a job in comics. And I thought to myself, is that something you can actually do? Didn't occur to me that there was any kind of comics industry that you could join or be part of. So I very naively wrote a letter to Marvel's London office, Marvel Comics London office. And I got a letter back saying, please come in and have a chat with us. And I thought, that's good. So I travelled to London and thinking that at best I might get a little tour of their offices because I'd shown an interest in comics. What I didn't know was that they were advertising in the national press for editorial trainees and thought I was applying for a job. So I arrived and there was a room full of 30 or so candidates waiting to be interviewed, of which I was one, again, slight pressure, so clearly I performed well because I got one of the jobs. And therefore learnt about comics from the inside by actually learning editorially how to put them together. My very first job was in the colour separation department. So if you ever want 9-sheet colour separation on acetate overlays, I'm your man. And then I became the assistant editor on a comic that had just been launched, and this will date me horribly. The comic had just been launched, and it became the best-selling comic in the UK for about 2 years, and it was called The Real Ghostbusters. And for 2 years, apart from doing all the paste up on Ghostbusters and writing stories for it, I was Egon Spengler. I wrote a thing called Spengler's Spirit Guide, where I, if you'll excuse my coarseness, I made shit up in a humorous fashion, pretending to be Egon Spengler. And I learned a huge amount doing that. Just the necessity of writing a story every week trained me, I suppose, to put stories together. And one of the things they did at Marvel is they wanted all their editors, or trainee editors like me, to write stories for the comics, because they didn't think there was any way we could edit other people if we hadn't understood how to write a story in the first place. How could I tell a writer what to do if I hadn't looked at it from the perspective of writing? So my early writing credits were Ghostbusters, Action Force, which is G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats, Galaxy Rangers, Mr. Men, Fireman Sam, Care Bears, Thomas the Tank Engine, Sylvanian Families. I've done them all. And I learned an enormous amount, because when you are writing for licensed properties like that, they are extremely restrictive. They're they've got a style guide. You've got to get the stories exactly right, and they've got to be approved. So I learned, under fairly pressurized conditions, to write to order, to get it right, or as close to right as I could, really quickly, so that it matched what the license holder wanted. And that, I think, was an incredibly useful thing to do, because as my career has then developed, and I've written for slightly stuff older and more sophisticated things, and indeed created my own things. I've got that rigid backbone of knowing how to sort of hit a small target accurately with writing. And in fact, one of my favourite things, and it's very unpopular these days, but as a writer for Marvel and DC, one of my favourite things is when an editor rings me up or sends me an email and say, we've got an issue running late, we need a fill-in issue on Green Lantern or Justice League. Just one 20-page story. And then they'll give me some ingredients. They'll say, we want Lex Luthor, Wonder Woman, Apocalypse, and Captain Carrot, whatever. And I take those things and I write a story. I tell the best story I can with that. I don't know if there's a television program in the UK called Ready Steady Cook. Has anybody heard of Ready Steady Cook? The whole idea of that is they're given a carrier bag full of ingredients, and they've got to cook the best. And I always think of it as that, is that I'm being given a plastic bag full of ingredients for a story, and I've got to create the best story I possibly can. Most freelance writers hate that. I love it. I love the idea of being given a really small target to hit, and then trying to produce the best thing I can. So I worked at Marvel UK and then went freelance, and because I like the writing part of it so much, and have since worked for Well, rather than give you a list, the easiest thing is to say the one thing I've never written for is Star Wars. Actually, that's the one big franchise that I've never written for. But any Marvel or DC character, Aliens, Predator, Terminator, yeah, anything you can possibly imagine. In comics, probably my biggest claim to fame or notoriety is that about 10 or so years ago, I was working for Marvel and I was writing some of their cosmic characters, that is to say, their superheroes in space. And they thought it was about time they had a team book in the cosmic universe, so that is to say, a group of heroes in the cosmic universe. And I used my knowledge of the Marvel universe to find a whole bunch of characters that had been created in the previous 20, 30, 25 years that had been forgotten about because they hadn't really been successful. They were broken. They weren't marquee characters like Spider-Man or Iron Man. When you're writing for a universe like Marvel or DC, you mustn't break the toys. You've got to respect these characters. But some of their characters in the universe are very, very sort of third or fourth or fifth rate, and they're not considered to be particularly important, so you've got more freedom with them. So I cobbled together some characters that I always liked that weren't very popular, and then I stole the name from a different superhero group to give them, and I put all that into a comic and wrote it, and that was called The Guardians of the Galaxy. And it was quite popular, mainly because it sort of made sense of characters that had never really worked before. And then, to my astonishment, Marvel Studios decided to make that into a film, which took everybody by surprise, particularly Marvel editorial, who thought I was just writing something using characters that no one cared about. In fact, they let me get away with anything I wanted on that comic because they didn't care about these characters, and suddenly today, as we know, they are globally recognised characters. So that was an enormously good fun thing to do. It was enormously rewarding for that to happen, and it was also very exciting. I live in the UK, and I got a phone call from James Gunn, who said, "We're filming at Shepperton. Would you like to come and see what we're doing with the comic you wrote? Because it's the comic you wrote, as opposed to any other version of the Guardians." So I visited the set on a number of occasions, met the cast, read the script before the film came out, got to go to the premiere, got my name in the credits. Also, it's an amazing experience from the point of view of somebody who basically spends his entire life on his own in a room with a keyboard writing, to suddenly encounter a world and to see characters that you've written, and in some cases created, brought to life. And to walk around the interior of the Milano spaceship, which is a fully realised three-dimensional ship that can be picked up and moved around. It is the thing. It's amazing, and it's also often quite surprising when you go out for a day and you get high-fived by Zoe Saldana when she's wearing her full Gamora costume. That's weird, but yeah, good as well. So yes, for a long time my career has been. I've gone to conventions and people say, "Oh, I really love your Warhammer work. Are you related to the Dan Abnett who writes for Marvel?" Or they say, "I love your 2000 AD work. Are you the brother of the Dan Abnett who does?" And I'm going, "No, it's all me. I do this." So I wear many different hats for reasons of it. And it's got to the point now, I think, where people are beginning to realise that there is just one person who does all this insane stuff. I think I've rambled extensively now. I will continue to do so unless someone stops me with a question. Anybody got a question? No pressure. Oh yes.
I got one.
There's one.
So, I'm just curious about your workflow a little bit. When you're moving in between projects, do you have like an extensive, map, like post-it notes on the wall to remember each universe, or do you just keep it all in your head? Thank you.
That's a very good question. The first thing I'd say is if any of you are prospective writers, the way I work might not suit you. the real message I want to communicate to you is find the way that works for you and exploit the hell out of that. That's just what I've done, and that happens to be that version. So in my case, yes, it would be. I've had various different ways of doing it over the years, but it now does. You are spot on. It's post-it notes everywhere in a fairly ordered fashion. I have post-it notes that not only list everything so I don't forget anything, but also means that I can move them around in priorities. If something suddenly becomes more important than the other, I can move them about. And I also use the same technique actually with writing novels, where particularly in the second half of the novel, I write all the individual plot points that I'm developing on separate post-it notes that I can then move in conjunction to each other on my desktop. So if you walk into my office, you know that I'm in the last 2 or 3 weeks of the novel, because my desk is covered with post-it notes with just a small space for my keyboard, and I'm writing it, and there's a huge satisfaction in the final few hours as I just start peeling post-it notes off and screwing them up and realising that I got down to the last 10 and the last 5 and the last 2 and then there's the last 1 and I finished the novel, hooray! And that's the only way I can keep track of it. I've tried more formal ways of keeping track of it by, sort of enormous flowcharts and diagrams and, sort of complicated electronic systems, and that doesn't work for me. I am, well, you can tell, wherever I go I've got a notebook and pen. I'm a pen and paper person until it actually comes to writing the copy. So I like those sort of old school ways of recording things. But yes, every now and then something slips through the net, but I think I've also, because I've been doing it for such a long time, my mind works like that table full of post-it notes, so I'm pretty good at noticing the difference. But like I said, just because that works for me, it may not work for you. The important thing is to find the system. It could be, I don't know, it could be a series of action figures with holding up signs, whatever it is that works for you when you've got your creative process. Is there another? That was a good question. Is there another question? Yes?
Yes. Are you ever influenced by actors' interpretations of your characters?
Have I ever been influenced by actors and their portrayal of my characters? Yeah, that's inevitable. I think when you've written a character and then you see that character get played by somebody, that it has an influence. Or if you're writing, not just characters that I've created, but sort of writing Wonder Woman once Gal Gadot had played Wonder Woman, it's different to writing Wonder Woman before she has, because you're influenced by that. I also, however, particularly with novels, I mentally cast my books to help me get a handle on the characters as I'm writing them. Some of my long-running series, in my head, I'm not going to necessarily share these with people, but in my head, I know who I would have played these characters in a film, so that when I'm writing it, I can imagine how they would act. Do you see what I mean? It helps me anchor them to a particular person. And that actually, with some of the longer-running series like Gaunt's Ghosts, which has been going for 20 plus years, I've just written the 15th novel, which means I've written 1.5 million words. I need a rest. With a series like that, the cast of Gaunt's Ghosts, as it were, my fantasy casting has changed over the years as I've thought I found a better person. I think Gaunt started out as James Coburn from the sort of circa the Magnificent Seven. And he's gone through several incarnations. So yes, I do that. But it is interesting. I've yet to see one of my characters come to life on screen and go, oh, that's not right. It's luckily, so that hasn't quite happened yet. But I think these days with comics and novels, you've got to be much more aware of the fact that everything is multi-platform. You're very unlikely to work on something that is not also represented by a game or a comic or a TV show or an action figure or whatever. You've got to be aware of the fact that these things are going to change. For the last 3 years I've been the DC's writer on Aquaman. I've written over 50 issues of Aquaman, and it was in the later stages of that they announced they cast Jason Momoa as Aquaman. So I immediately gave my Aquaman a beard. It's just... It's not because I wanted him to suddenly become Jason Momoa, but I thought at some point DC's going to want me to make this character more Momoa-esque. And so if I give him a beard right now, as a step in the right direction, it won't be such a huge leap when the time comes. Thank you. Have we got another question?
Do your characters ever inspire another character or something like that?
Yes, they often do. Characters, I was telling this story earlier, so if anybody was present for that, I apologise, I'm going to tell it again. Characters can be... When I was starting out as a writer, I love reading. By the way, if you want to be a writer, there's two things you should do. Write, I know that's really obvious, but the more you write, the better. But also read. Reading is the fuel. So I've always been a voracious reader. And I'd often read interviews and articles and forwards and stuff by writers that I really admired, talking about they know a book is really working well when the characters come to life and start determining what they're going to do, and it's beyond the author's control because the characters have a life of their own and you can hear what they're saying and they're making the choices. And I've always gone, that's just part of the magic of being a writer. It's a bit pretentious. It doesn't really work like that. That it's much more of a sort of mechanical process of creation and being very deliberate about it. But when I'd written about 5 or 6 novels. This is a little while ago. I'd written about 5 or 6 novels, and I was writing the latest novel, which was the 3rd or 4th in a series of books, and it was going tremendously well. My novels, the Warhammer ones, tend to be about 100,000 words long each, and I write them in about 3 or 4 months it takes me to write a novel. And I had a month left on my deadline, and I'd written about 80,000 words, and it was all going really, really well. And my computer died. And first of all, that was the day I learned to back up. But I had lost the entire 80,000 word manuscript. And all I had left was my notes and my plan, and a sort of vague and rather sad memory of the book that I'd lost. And I rang my editor up and I said, what do I do? And he was really worried that we would be penalised by the printer. We had a printer deadline and that there would be penalties to pay. And he said, what are the chances, he said, of you writing it again in a month? Now, if he'd said that to me today, well, I can't say what I'd say because this is a public and family event. But back then I was eager and enthusiastic, and I wanted to please him. So I said, I'll give it a go. So I sat down, and in the space of 4 weeks, I rewrote the novel from memory, and then finished it and delivered it. So what have we learned here? Number 1, back up. Number 2, I can write a novel in less than a month. But beyond that were much more interesting things that really taught me a lot about the writing process. The first one was I wrote it in a kind of almost trance-like state. I had to write it so fast. It was subconscious. I was sitting down, I wasn't really thinking about what I was doing, I was just trying to write. My wife, who is also a writer, describes it as me going into the zone. When things are going really, really well, I enter the zone, and hours can go by and I'm not aware of it, and suddenly I've got 6,000 or 7,000 words. Well, this was that for a month. As I produced this, I mean, I stopped to eat, obviously, but it was this intensive experience. So I wasn't deliberately planning it, I was just sort of summoning it from somewhere and writing it down. Now, you'd think that would be shit. You'd think that's not a good way to write a novel, really, seriously. I don't think it's recommended. I don't think Robert McKee says, the way to write a novel, burn the first one, give yourself a month, go. I don't think he says that. But for me, it really, really worked. And the novel that I produced was significantly better than the one that I'd lost. It was the same novel, followed the same story, had the same characters in it, generally speaking, but it was a better, more polished version of the original, with a really, really intricate symbolism and symmetry within it that really took me by surprise. When I read it back afterwards, I went, my God, that's clever! And I hadn't done it deliberately, but it was really, really smart sort of symbolism structured in it. It was a superior book, and I think it was a superior book because I'd sort of had a dress rehearsal. I'd rehearsed it once, And then I was doing it for real, and so everything really flowed from that point. But the second and rather more alarming thing that happened was that there was a character in the second version of the book who wasn't in the first version, that I didn't create. I was writing the book, I was about a week into it, my life was a blur, it was like, you know, X number of 1,000 words a day, and suddenly I was aware that there was this new character in the text who was talking to people, and I sort of found myself talking to the monitor going, who are you? Get out of my book. What are you doing here? And I think I haven't got time to go back and write you out. You know, who would you? And this character took on a life of its own and started, and I wasn't sort of, he had a name, and he was a very distinctive character, and he talked in a very distinctive way, but I hadn't at any point consciously planned that or decided that this character would be called that. And he was there, and he wouldn't go away. And I thought, I'm going to lose 3 or 4 days if I go back and try and write him out. I'll just live with it. I'll let him be there. And he was in this book, and then he started sort of determining the course of the plot. And I was going, I'm losing control of my own book. What are you doing? And it was the weirdest thing. And he is now, he then made it through to the final version, and I couldn't get rid of him. It was been too difficult to remove him. And I read the book at the end, and I went, actually, that's really good. I really like him. That character became one of the most popular characters in the whole book series, and was the principal villain for the next 4 novels. And clearly I created him, but I don't remember consciously creating him or even consciously naming him. He just happened. So in the terms of these, you know, proper writers who say, oh yes, it's lovely when the book becomes alive and the characters speak to you, yeah, but no, it does, it happens. This character walked in from somewhere, got inside my book, said, I'm not fucking leaving, I am here, and stayed, and became this thing. So that to me is the really interesting thing. I really connect to my characters. I hope that's the reason that people find my books readable, because I automatically believe they're real. I don't mean that in a kind of quickly fetch an ambulance type way, but you know what I mean? Because I can hear them in terms of the way they would respond, I presume that that's why people bond with them. So as a knock-on effect, people seem to really connect to the characters. When I go to conventions, they get very excited about particular characters. They show great concern for characters. And when I kill characters off, and let's face it, a lot of what I do is military science fiction, so there is a high body count, people get surprisingly upset with that. I get upset. There have been occasions where I have not planned necessarily to kill a particular character, and then that's where the plot's taken me. And I have been known to get quite upset that I have killed a character that I wasn't expecting to lose. But I have also been, and I think that's why there's security present today. A few years ago, I was on one occasion attacked by a reader who was rather upset that I had killed a character. It ended very peacefully, I have to say, but I was at a signing in the UK, and I had a lovely long line of people signing, and I just published a book where a major character had not only died, to everybody's shock, but had died in a fairly unpleasant and unfair way. And I had done it quite deliberately to prove to my readership that this was a war stories and people could be vulnerable, and that no one was safe. A kind of George R.R. Martin, you know, watch out kind of warning, which, anyway, so this queue was moving towards me, and people were coming up with their books and going, hello, how are you, I love your books, I really like that bit when that happened, and thank you very much, and getting their books signed and moving on. And I could see this guy, and he was on his own, further back down the queue, and he was sort of agitated, like that. He had his book in his hands, and he was quite agitated about something, and I thought maybe he's been queuing for a while and he really needs the loo, and you know, we'll get to, anyway, so he arrived at me and he handed me the book to be signed, and he said, I really like your books, and I said, thank you very much. And he said, I was quite struck by the latest one, and I said, well, okay. And then he said, is it, and I won't mention the character, spoiler alert, but he said, is it true that this character is really dead? And I went, well, what do you think? And he goes, well, it looks like he's dead. And I said, well, he probably is then. And at that point, two things happened. One is the guy came across the table towards me like that. I was slowing that down. It was a much more sudden gesture. And at the same time, the two guys who were manning the rope line came across the table sideways towards him and intercepted him like a football tackle before he actually managed to make contact with me. And everybody was terribly horrified, and I have to say, it did take me aback a bit, but when the guy calmed down, I went and talked to him, and I said, why were you're clearly very upset about it. And he goes, well, it's my favourite character, and I'm really, really, really upset. And I said, well, on the one hand, it's just a book. You know, it is just a fictional character, and therefore, I think your response was a little bit, you know, overmuch to really. But on the other hand, he just paid me the biggest compliment that anyone could pay me, because I'd written a character that was so real to him. The fact that I had killed that character off had upset him enough that he wanted to attack me. So I sort of ended up thanking him. But yeah, so yes, connecting with characters is a really weird thing. Once or twice, characters have actually sort of quite upset me by their behaviour in novels. But yeah, that's, you know, I live with them. I live with them all in here. So. Thank you for your question. Is there another question? Has anybody got a?
Yeah, I have a question. Especially since you're writing in genre fiction, which is sort of, you know, always spaceships and always space travel, and there is military and there is fighting and stuff. How do you sort of avoid the feeling that everything has been done before?
That's a very good question. If you didn't hear it, how do you avoid the tropes of science fiction when you're talking about, you know, ray guns and spaceships and all those things that everyone's written about forever? I think there are a number of different things. One is, I think some of those things are enjoyable, and that's why we love them, really. So they, you know, you can't get enough blasters, as far as I'm concerned. Two is one of the things I've always tried to do, particularly in my prose fiction, is to create a sense of authenticity. So it doesn't matter if you've seen it before. You've seen a spaceship that can travel at warp speed, or a blaster, or whatever. What I want you to do is to believe in the one that I'm telling you about, because that will make it seem much more. It doesn't, you know, say it doesn't matter. So it's authenticity rather than originality is the thing that I'd really like to create in my books, and I do that in a very particular way. I do a lot of research. I of course love reading the genre and watching science fiction movies and everything like that, and they're always inspiring. But most of the research that I do for my books is real-world factual research, historical research. I will visit places, I will read books and stuff about the Second World War, the Vietnam War, or whatever it is. I will talk to people, experts in the fields of various different things. So any real-world experience that I can get, I will absorb. And then, for want of a better way of putting it, I try and then slide it sideways into science fiction. So, to give you an example, I wrote a novel for Warhammer. It was called Titanicus, and it was based on the idea of the giant walking war machines called Titans, which are huge sort of mech warrior things that have crews inside them and stomp about blasting people to pieces and everything like that. Now, clearly, though it's very sad, clearly those things don't actually exist. So I can't go to the Royal Icelandic Titanicus Museum and examine them. You know, I can't research them and do that kind of thing. So I decided to try and find the closest real-world analogues that I could research, and that was tanks, obviously. And then I thought, no, actually submarines. Now, submarines might be underwater, but the key connection is it is a trained military crew in a claustrophobic metal box under combat conditions. So for Titanicus, I did a huge amount of research about submarines and then shifted it sideways into the book about Titans. And everybody went, oh my God, these are the most believable Titans I've ever read. And I went, well, it's because I tried to anchor it into something that you would find connective and believable. So that is a technique I use all the time. And when I started out, it was all through books. As my career has gone on, I've been lucky enough to traveling around the world, meet all sorts of interesting people who turn out to be remarkably expert in something. So, for example, I've met loads of military veterans and serving military who've enjoyed my books, and then I've built up a relationship with them by correspondence, by email, where I can ask them questions. I can say, I'm writing about this, is there anything you can recommend that I think of? So I can actually sort of pick their brains for stuff. I also have I've got a scene of crime officer in Chicago, and I've got a geneticist down in Memphis, and that kind of stuff. Just people, these aren't people I've sought out, there are people I've encountered who've gone, I really like your books, and you got into a conversation and they go, well, I do this for a living, and I go, oh my God, can I talk to you about that? Because I'm not going to steal their knowledge or steal their stories. What I'm going to do is learn from what makes their stories sound real, because they are real, and use that. So I have I have a friend in the UK he works for a thing called English Heritage, which is, I don't know, it's like the National Trust. They preserve ancient buildings. And he will spontaneously arrange visits to the most unlikely things. I've stood in the middle of Stonehenge at dawn on a solstice at 4 o'clock in the morning because he had access to do that. I've clambered about in the side of a Vulcan bomber, the last flying Vulcan bomber, because he had access to do that. And those things, apart from being amazing experiences, you learn things not directly. I've not then gone home and written a novel about Stonehenge or Vulcan bombers, but what I've learned about Stonehenge and Vulcan bombers has gone sideways into science fiction to make you feel it was more authentic. I think that was a long-winded answer, but I hope it will do the trick. Is there another question?
Yeah. So mainly by asking about your, as an author, having about adaptations, more specifically audiobooks.
Yes.
And more specifically, as the Black Library has now started actually giving out audiobooks, and Guns Go specifically, they've done War Master and none of the others.
Yes.
Making it a bit hard to get into it if you have reading disabilities.
Yes. I believe that they are now when I started writing them, which was during the, first Ice Age, they didn't routinely produce audiobooks, and if they did, they were abridged audiobooks as well. And they saved up the audiobook treatment for things like the Horus Heresy, and what they considered to be important. Now we've got a much bigger audience. They have obviously started doing the audiobooks with the new releases, but I understand that they are going back to the beginning, and they are now doing a systematic program of turning them all into unabridged audiobooks so that the whole catalogue will be available. And in fact, it was something I asked them specifically to do for that very reason. So you might have to wait a little bit whilst they catch up, but they are catching up. I know they've now done all of the Eisenhorn books, all of the Ravena books, and I think Pariah. And if anybody here is a fan of Pariah and the Beckwin trilogy, of which only one part so far exists, you'll be pleased to know that I've just begun work on the second part. So there you go. But yes, there will be audiobooks of everything. Have we got another question?
Yes, I have a question. Being a freelance writer, is there like a series or character you most enjoy writing for?
Yeah, yes, there is. Is there a character I most enjoyed writing for? Sometimes it's the unexpected things that you really like. The simplest answer to that is my favourite character to write for is the one I've just written for. Because there's the freshness of that experience, the excitement of doing it. So my favourite novel is the one I've just finished. I can't be more objective than that. But there are certain ones that are joyful and have been really unexpectedly good fun. So even some of the mainstay ones. I really enjoyed, for instance, writing Aquaman. But what I really enjoyed about writing Aquaman was the ability to write Mira, who is his partner, who is one of the best and most underrated characters in the DC universe. And I finally got to give her her own limited series, and after 50 plus years of her existing as a character, to show that she was a key character in the DC universe, and put her in the Justice League and that kind of stuff. So that was rewarding. And some of the things that I don't know if they make it to Iceland, but some of the stuff I did for 2000 AD, where I've created series for that comic. There's a series I've been writing for the last 20 years that I created called Sinister Dexter, which I'm incredibly fond of. And there's a new series that's running in 2000 AD at the moment called Brink, which is a kind of police procedural in space with sort of horror overtones, which is it's only been running for about a year, but it's now the most popular new strip in 2000 AD, which I'm incredibly proud of. And those sorts of things are, it's fun to work for DC and Marvel, but there's a lot of pressure involved because it's their universe. So to spend a week doing that kind of stuff and then being able to go to, say, 2000 AD and write an episode of Brink or something is so freeing, because I'm the only one who says what's right, because I created it, you know what I mean? So it is. I have a huge enthusiasm for the genre, so I love doing everything. Unless I really have to, I try not to take on jobs that I'm not going to like very much. And sometimes they're even more fun than I think they're going to be, but most of the time they're as much fun as I hoped they would be, because they sounded like fun when I was approached to do it. And sometimes they can be unexpectedly fun. When I started working on the Alien Isolation game, for instance, I thought, well, that's quite interesting. I love the Alien movies, particularly the first two. That turned into one of the most extraordinary experiences, where I ended up writing dialogue for Sigourney Weaver to record. And I'm going, I didn't expect that when I started this job. Do you know what I mean? And produce a game that has won BAFTAs, and you know, so they go off in directions that you're not expecting. Similarly, writing those orcs for the Shadow of Mordor, that was unexpectedly good fun, because I didn't expect to have to write 60,000 lines of dialogue so fast. And they wanted the characters to speak like gangsters in British gangster movies, so like Ray Winston or Bob Hoskins, and I had to write these dialogues so quickly that I found the most efficient way of doing it was to sit at my desk with my keyboard and my spreadsheet open for all the different line variables and say each line out loud as I composed it to make sure it sounded right. So I had to put on that kind of, so I was doing it in accents. So I was sitting there writing all these gangster lines in that kind of voice. It's going to be an eruption, that kind of thing, as I went through. Which is fine for the first 2 or 3 days, but when you're doing that intensively for 3 weeks, you can't stop. So after about 4 days, got to the end of the day, and my wife would go, "Dinner's ready," and I'd go, "Oh, just come in, love." Which made me enormously popular. So yeah, it's the only job I've ever done, which is the reverse of your question, the only job I would never, ever do again was about 20 years ago. I made the mistake of saying yes when asked if I would help write the comic that was given away free with the Ronald McDonald Happy Meal. I did that for, I think, 4 issues before I committed sort of professional suicide and said, I simply in all conscience cannot do this anymore. Keep your dirty McDonald's money. I won't do it. And the reason I did it, because it wasn't difficult. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of Ronald McDonald, but he's a clown who likes hamburgers. And there's this other guy who steals hamburgers, who's called the Hamburglar. Are we all up to speed, okay? Not complex, it's not Proust, you know what I'm saying? It's not the Journal of the Wills, it's not Tolkien, it's not complicated, okay? When you write a licensed character, they send you what they call this character Bible that sums up everything you need to know. So when I started working for DC, for example, they sent me the one for Batman, which I think runs to about 5 pages. It's just a short document that sums up the then 60 plus years of Batman continuity into all the essential things you need to know about Batman in order to write it. So Batman, 60 years, 6 pages, okay? When I wrote the Ronald McDonald Happy Meal comic, they sent me the Ronald McDonald character Bible. It was 48 pages long. 48! And there was a separate one for the Hamburglar. I think actually at that point that should have been the clue that they were taking it really seriously. But I did persevere, and it was just like reading through these pages of Ronald McDonald would always do this, and he would never do that. And I went, he's a clown. and he likes hamburgers. I think I can fit that on less than a page. But no, and so that's the only one. And God bless McDonald's and all who sail in her, because there was that. But that was the only job where I just went, they're not paying me enough to do this horrible thing. But it was useful. You learn. Do you know what I mean? You learn and you grow. What can I say? Thank you for your question. Is there another question? Yes, there is. Oh, there's a man there with a... Oh, hi.
Yeah, I have a simple question. What was the name of the 1 month book?
So you can scrutinise it and work out how shit it really is, yeah. It was the 4th Gaunt's Ghost novel, Honor Guard, which is a lovely thing. And your follow-up question, so who is the character who came in from nowhere? It's a character called Elijah Koo, who is a very famous character in the series now, but he was not knowingly created by me. So there you go. I'm telling you now. Down here.
As a writer, how do you get your ideas of what you're going to do?
When I'm asked that question I usually give a really flippant answer. And by the way, seeing your apparent age, I do apologise for the swearing that I did just now. My answer is usually I think of them. That's where I get my ideas from, I think of them. But that is a very flippant answer because that is true, but I think of them because I've been doing it for a long time, and I guess I have trained my brain to recognise the connection between one thing and another. So in the way you go through your day and go, oh look, bottle of water, newspaper, whatever things, it's like I've got an app running in my brain all the time where I make connections between things and go, oh gosh, that's an interesting combination of things. And that's not just something that comes with experience, that's something that comes with enthusiasm and imagination. When you can look at something very ordinary and see something strange in it, if you start doing that, you can then imagine stories almost everywhere. And that's quite an exciting thing to do. Another technique, and again, this may not work for everybody, but it works for me, so I'll mention it. I find trains are very useful. And by that I mean the vehicles that run on tracks and take people from city to city. I don't know what it is about travelling on a train, but whenever I have to travel on a train and the world goes by my window, and it's not that I'm looking at something in particular, it's just the world going by, it's like mindfulness or something. I have these amazing ideas. I sit there in a rest state, and suddenly these ideas will fill me with... I remember doing a signing in London. I had an hour-long train journey to get to London to do a signing, and I was cross about it because I was trying to produce 3 plots that day, and I couldn't think of an idea for any of those 3 plots. And I went, I'll just go to the signing. I got on the train, and in the space of the hour it took me to get to London, I spontaneously had all the 3 ideas that I wanted because the train journey had sort of encouraged them out of me. So maybe what that is actually sometimes you can think too hard to get an idea, and what you need to do is to do something completely different instead, and the idea will suddenly pop up into your head. Wherever I go, I've weighed this around before, I take a notebook, I write down anything that I find interesting. It could be the colour of a balloon. I say that because I can see a green balloon from here. It might be somebody's name. The green balloon doesn't matter. But yes, it's over there. It might be somebody's name, it might be an interesting word, it might be a whole idea, but I write it all down because I don't know where I'm going to use it, but it goes in there. And therefore, I can sort of harvest and collect the ideas as I go along so that they're ready for use when I finally need to sit down and write them. But I think sometimes just going and doing something else different is a really good idea. And I probably shouldn't admit this because this really does make me sound crazy, but every now and then when I get stuck on an idea and I really can't make something work, if I'm in the middle of a chapter and I can't make it work, I live about 5 minutes walk from my local train station in Maidstone in Kent, and I wander down to the train station and I buy a return ticket to the next town down, and I try to wait for the train to come in, I get on the train and I ride it down to the next station and I get off and ride the train back again. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just using the train journey to see if it will make my brain work in that connective way, and it almost always does. So it's not a waste of money or something that I should be, looked into by the police about. But yeah. But again, what I'm saying is, do you want to write? Did you ask the question because you're interested in writing? Yeah? Or being an artist of some sort? I think if you're being a creative person, pursue that with as much enthusiasm as you can bring to bear, and don't listen to people like me. What I'm saying is, don't listen to people who do it already and they say, well, you should do this, this and this, because this is obviously the way it works, because I've done it and that's how it works. The only thing you should listen to is the idea is, do it and find the way that works for you. You might find that you need to wear pink socks and hang upside down in a hammock and write in crayon, and then you write your best stories. And that wouldn't work for me, but if it works for you, that's the important thing. So you define your own method of creativity, and then exploit the hell out of it. You know, just once you've got it, once you've worked out whether you're a slightly too busy person or a slightly too less busy person, or lots of things all at once person, or a focus on one thing. I can give you two examples. My wife is also a writer. She's a novelist. We've written things together. She writes far less than I do. She never writes the same thing twice, and she writes intensively one thing for a sort of 3 or 4 month period. When she's writing a novel, that's it. Nothing else happens. No, the dog doesn't get fed. She doesn't wash. It's horrible. But she will just do that one thing for 3 or 4 months until that book is finished, and then she'll stop, and that'll be the end of that process. Whereas I'm doing lots of different things every day on an ongoing process. So I do it like a mosaic, and she does it like not a mosaic. I have another friend who I consider to be an extraordinarily good writer who hates writing. He's a really good writer, but he hates writing. So he gets up in the morning and he sits at his keyboard and he'll sort of write a sentence, grudgingly, and then delete half of it, and then stare at it, then go and make a cup of tea, then come back, then stare at it, then delete the rest of it, then write another one, then delete some of it. And that's his life. And he loves having written. When he's written something, he's really pleased that he's written something, and it's great. And he loves the fact of having written it and been a writer, but he hates the process of actually being a writer. But I go to myself, why do you do it then? Why do you put yourself through that? But clearly, that's what suits him. Do you see what I mean? So if you, and indeed anybody here, want to be an actor, a writer, an artist, a musician, or whatever, you've got to pursue something creatively. The two things you've got to do is, one, do that thing. You can't say I'm a writer but not write. You've got to write or play practice your instrument, whatever it is. Build up those muscles. Do your 10,000 hours to get proficiency. Just whatever it is to become that thing, so that you wouldn't leave your house. You wouldn't have never. If somebody said to you, run a marathon, and you'd never gone jogging, you wouldn't really expect to finish the marathon, would you? Whereas if you jogged on a regular basis and maybe practiced, you'd stand a good chance of doing the marathon. So it's the same thing. A novel is like a marathon. You wouldn't just expect one morning to get up and write a novel. But if you've been writing for the fun of writing, could be anything and everything, just little bits and pieces for years and years and years, then, or months and months and months or whatever, you will have that energy and enthusiasm. So do that thing and find your way of doing it. And don't let anybody tell you that it's not the way you should be doing it. Take advice on technical merits, but not on the actual process. Your process should be your process. Wow, that got serious. Do we have any more questions? How are we doing for time? Oh, we're doing for time, yeah. God, I've rambled.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, in the process of making characters, how do you deal with character development?
I wish I could say I had extensive, complex flowcharts where I plan these things out and I carefully moderate them and I do it in a very sophisticated manner. I'm afraid I don't. It is all intuitive. Like I said, I have a feeling for characters, and I just I sometimes have to check back where I've left them and what's going on, but I sort of have that sense of progress in my head. When you're working on characters that are part of a shared universe like Marvel or DC, of course, you do that in relationship to the editor, because the editor might say my characterization of that character is not spot on at the moment, it shouldn't be the way it is. But for everything in the novels, I chart it. Again, it's note-taking, it's reference back. When I was sitting up in the green room before I came down here, it looked really sadly, I'll show you this. I brought a book with me. Sadly, it's one I wrote. So I was sitting in the green room reading my own book. People thinking, God, he doesn't half think a lot of himself, doesn't he? But the reason I was doing that was because I was reminding myself, and I was taking notes about what I'd done with those characters, the certain words and things that I'd used there, so that the next part of that series will fit better, because I will remember not just the general terms. I remember what the story is, but it's the nuance of where that sat and what the emotional tone was, so that I can carry that on and chart the reference to the things. And sometimes you can plot that in advance. You can see where you want a character to be, or something you want your character to do and achieve, and head for that target. And that's great, because it means that you can actually then adjust the way their character, their personality moves in pursuit of that destination in the story. And every now and then that is useful as well, because it will show you that that's not the destination they should be heading for. Do you know what I mean? You've set them an impossible goal. You need to do something else with them because that wasn't going to work. Some of the good plot twists that I've been pleased with in my novels have been where I've decided that I was going the wrong way, and something else better occurred to me, and so you veer. So the novels veer around like real life. You know, you think you're going to Grandma's for dinner tomorrow, but it turns out you're not. You're going to the chip shop instead, because you know what I mean. You take the courses as it organically falls out below. I always try and deliver outlines to my editors that say, you know, this novel will start at A and will end at C, and there will be a B somewhere in the middle, and keep it really vague, so that the actual way I take the novel from A to C could be through any number of different B's that make sense to me as I'm writing it. Again, sounded a more technical answer than it actually was. I make it up. That's the answer. Do we have any more questions?
Yes.
Where am I looking? Oh, hi.
So, what is your favorite thing to write? Out of all the different things you've written for DC, Marvel, Warhammer, what's your favorite thing to write?
I always thought that when I started writing novels, because I always wanted to write novels, that was my ambition when I was very young, I wanted to write novels. Although I loved writing comics, and I started writing comics professionally, that once I'd started writing novels, I would let the comics go. I would have graduated to prose, and they'll be happy there. The fact that I haven't shows you how much I love the form of comics. That comics are an incredibly sophisticated art form that people don't give enough credit to. It really, really is. I'm not about to lecture you on the merits of positive, passive and active storytelling in comics right now, but it is an extraordinarily complex storytelling form that I think is underrated, and I can't not write them. You know, I love writing them. I love the challenge of writing them. So, just in terms of form, I always thought prose would take over from comics, and in fact, I write them sort of 50% equally, except that I now squeeze games in there as well, just for the sheer hell of it, because they're an interesting challenge. The reason I write games, I'm not a player of games, because if I played games, I would never get any work done. So I deliberately know that about myself, so I haven't started playing games. And I'm completely ignorant of games. The reason I started doing that is because it was interesting. I was really interested in the way how you wrote stories for essentially non-linear or multi-optional storytelling. That really fascinated me. And also the fact, as I said earlier on, I spent most of my day alone at a keyboard. I love the fact that when you're working on a game, you get to deal with a room full of games developers. There is a social element involved where you're brainstorming with other people. So rather than slowly, over time, narrowing down what I like to write to a very specific type and then saying, and therefore my favourite character is this, it's got broader and broader and broader as I've gone along. Sorry, but that's the answer to your question. But it is really, really difficult. It's easier to answer what am I really proud of, I guess, and I think that will be things like Guardians of the Galaxy, because of what Guardians of the Galaxy became. I'm very, very proud of the Eisenhorn novels I wrote, because they're the sort of gateway drug of 40k, Warhammer. You know, that's the thing that people say, read Eisenhorn before you read anything else. That's the way in. I'm very proud of the fact that I wrote Horus Heresy novels, and that's, you know, a ridiculously successful series of books, etc., etc., etc. There are things I'm very proud of, but it's very, very hard for me to pick an absolute utter favourite. Yeah, that'll have to be the answer to that question. Thank you. Do we have anybody? Where's the microphone next? I hunt the microphone. Oh, hello.
Hello. Could you discuss a little bit the difference in working on a story alone versus working in a team of writers?
Sorry, could you say the last bit again? The difference between working on?
Working on a story alone versus working with a team of writers.
Sure, yeah. Writing, as I said, is a very solitary thing. Being a novelist is a very solitary thing. When you work in the comics industry, of course, when you're writing a comic, you are part of a team. You're not necessarily part of a writing team, but you're there with usually a penciler, an inker, a colorist, and a letterer, and an editor. So you're part of a group that is responsible for producing that creative endeavor in that comic. But working broader than that is an interesting experience, and that was really brought home to me when we started to do the Horus Heresy series at Games Workshop. The Horus Heresy series is the background myth of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. For those of you who don't know, it's kind of the Clone Wars of Warhammer. And it's a huge deal. The storyline was outlined in the late 80s by the game designers, and no one had ever written, so there were bits and pieces, but no one had ever written anything formally in it, and they decided they wanted to do it as a novel series that would tell the whole thing. And I was one of the people recruited. In fact, I wrote the very first novel. And we were all very trepidatious because about 6 novelists were summoned for a writer's room meeting to discuss how we would share up this series between us. And the group of novelists has actually grown since then because we've written 50 plus novels in this series. And we all got on well. We all knew each other because we all wrote for Black Library, and we all met each other at conventions. We got on perfectly well. There was no animosity or anything like that. But there's difference between sitting with somebody at the bar at a convention and having a nice chat about your novels and actually sitting at a table and working out on how to work together when you're something as insular as a novelist. And we discovered to our delight that rather than descending into fistfights, the writer's room was the most extraordinarily sort of egalitarian place to work. There was a genuine democracy of ideas that evolved where we would throw ideas in to the melting pot, not intending to write them ourselves, or not on the condition that we wrote them ourselves. So we would create ideas and then somebody else would write them, and we'd be completely happy about that because what mattered to us was how good the series was, not who got to write which bit. And that was a really useful experience because it taught me that actually that brainstorming process, which can be incredibly exciting and inspiring, can work on any form of creative endeavour. It certainly works on a comic, and it can work on something like a game where there's a necessity to bring all the different disciplines together and make sure that everything's working together. But it can work on something that is as personal as writing a novel, and you can still get that to work. And I really appreciate having that experience to know there is something great about being your own boss writing a novel where you only answer to yourself and you're just you. And there's no other person present for 100,000 words in any direction, and it's just you're doing that book, and therefore it's all about your own creative process. Even then, I'm never sure if I've done that correctly until it's gone through my beta readers. My wife is my first line editor, my copy editor, and then I've got the copy editors at other publishers as well. To actually have somebody go, yeah, that is a good book, well done, or you need to tweak this or whatever. But it's there is something magnificently exciting about being the sole creator on something. But there is also something extraordinary about the collaborative process because we found, particularly with the Horus Heresy, that it generates ideas that wouldn't have existed if we hadn't all been there. It's not to say, I'm not saying that we've pushed and we've had somebody there who's come up with a better idea. The point I'm making is that you might sit there with 2 or 3 people and you each might have the good ideas that you're going to have, and because they all happen in the same place at the same time, it produces another idea that none of you would have come up with as a process of synthesizing those ideas. And that's the extraordinary thing about collaboration, is where you get to something that is beyond the ability of anyone to do individually, beyond their range, because you just put them into contrast. For a while, Games Workshop used to be worried about having their design stolen. So they stopped letting the freelancers into the games design studio We would meet in the meeting room, but we wouldn't be allowed into the main design studio. And we realized after a while that our productivity was drying up because just walking into that room where they had the figure builders and designers and sculptors working was so inspiring that we always came away charged up with ideas, not because we'd literally seen something that we wanted to write about, but because we'd walked into there and had a chat and been enthused by something. And so the same thing, that sort of casual collaboration had produced a creative state beyond that which we would have otherwise come away with. So I'm all for collaboration, and I think if you've collaborated with anybody to that degree, you will know that it's when you get that X thing that is beyond what either one of you or any one of the group would have done on their own. Wow, I'm hitting every single microphone in sight with my gestures. So. Do we have any more questions?
Yes, I would like to ask if there is any already existing character who you always wanted to write but you never get to.
Any existing character that I've always wanted to write? Yes, there are many, because I love comics. I said earlier on, I would love to write Star Wars because I've always loved Star Wars. So the opportunity to write something Star Wars related would be great. But in the comic universes, I have written most Marvel and DC characters, but the opportunity to take one of those characters not as a guest star in a book, but to write their book, I've always wanted to write Wonder Woman, strangely. I've written her a lot in other comics, but I would love to have a go at writing Wonder Woman. I'd love to write Constantine, John Constantine. Over at Marvel, I particularly love Iron Man, and I particularly love Daredevil, and I particularly love Doctor Strange. All characters that I have written, but not one I've written as their ongoing book. So that they are things that I really like to do. And there are some sort of much more minor characters that I'd love to write that won't necessarily get their own book, but I'd love to do, Kazar or Adam Strange or Zatanna or something like that. There's all sorts of different things. But like I said, I also like the unexpected nature of being given something. Of getting that phone call and saying, "Can you write this?" Well, not in a million years I thought I was going to. And that was sort of how Aquaman came along. I've always quite liked Aquaman, and I always thought he'd be a fun character to write because I thought there was huge potential there. I felt he'd been done a huge disservice to by years of Big Bang Theory and Adult Swim taking the piss out of him for being the guy who talks to fish, and the epitome of the lame superhero. And I went, but he's cool. He's like the underwater Thor. What are you talking about? So that was one of my objectives when I took him over. But I wasn't campaigning to take on Aquaman. I just got a call one day and said, "Would you like to take on Aquaman?" And I went, "Yes, okay." And immediately could put those ideas into. So these things pop up. You get offered things sometimes that you are not expecting. The same thing happened, let's go back a few years when I wrote Legion of Superheroes for DC. I actually hadn't read Legion of Superheroes at that point. I was still a fairly novice DC reader because I hadn't had access to it. And they said, "Will you take on Legion of Superheroes?" And for anybody who doesn't know, Legion of Superheroes is the most complicated piece of DC Universe continuity you could put. It's a super team with about 4.5 billion members set in the future. It is so complicated. And I naively went, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Yeah. And I loved that. I loved doing it because I didn't know what to expect. And I read my way through hundreds and hundreds of comics and brainstormed what I was going to do, and it turned out to be a very successful run. But it would never have occurred to me to go, "I want to write Legion of Superheroes." I think what made it fun was the fact that it was like Legion of Superheroes. Okay then. It was the unexpected nature of that. So maybe I shouldn't ever be given Iron Man or Doctor Strange because I want to do them too much. Maybe they should ring me up and offer me. I don't know, but you know what I mean. Something I haven't thought. The thing I haven't thought of. Stiltman. I don't know. Stiltman's pretty cool actually. Goes up and down on stilts. I think the clue's in his name, to be honest. I don't know how his knees were. No, anyway, I'm going to... Is there another question? Have we got time for another question? Yes, we've got time for another question. Another question?
Yeah, so as an aspiring writer living in Iceland, I do write English. So I was wondering if you had any advice for someone who wanted to try and get published in like the UK or the US or something of that sort?
Yes, in some respects, getting published these days has become a great deal easier thanks to the opportunities that are available online and self-publishing and stuff like that. I have to say I am not an enthusiastic supporter of those methods of approach. Back in the day, you literally had to do the legwork and go to conventions and press the flesh and meet editors and convince them that you were the guy for the job or the girl for the job, and that was hard work. And you could buy a copy of the Writers and Artists Yearbook if you were writing a novel, and you would submit to agents, and you would submit to the, work your way through it methodically. All those sorts of things are now unfashionable. I think they're still the best way to approach it. Seriously, I think you could sell yourself short if you don't. I think comics work really, really well. Small press stuff works really, really well on a self-published level or an indie level, and I'm a massive supporter of that. But go beyond that. I think you need to have confidence in what you're doing, and there's no easy route. If you have the opportunity to go to conventions, writing comics, for instance, if you've got the opportunity to go to conventions and meet with editors who are present, do so. And if you're really serious about it, make those opportunities happen. If that means going to the States, do it. And if you're wanting to be a writer, buying a copy of the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which is a wonderful book that's published every year, going through it and discovering which publishers publish the sort of fiction you want to write, and submitting to them on the basis of their guidelines. That is to say, don't send your 800,000 word romantic novel to a publisher of scientific textbooks. Do you know what I mean? Read the instructions. They all give you instructions about how to submit, whether they're taking submissions, what those submissions should look like. Follow the rules, which is the first important thing that will prove that you're somebody they want to publish. But for a lot of the publishers, Games Workshop, for instance, the Black Library, publishing the Warhammer stuff, they do not accept submissions for most of the year, but every year they have an open submissions window, which is advertised on their website, so just subscribe to their website and check it every now and then, where they will invite, I think it's usually 1,000 or 2,000 word story submissions, and the winners, or the best, I think it's usually 2 or 3, submitted, will get an opportunity to write a paid-for professional job for them, which could then lead to an ongoing engagement with them. And that is a matter of not only showing what a good writer you are, but also that how good you are at following the rules. So they'll say, it's got to be 2,000 words, it's got to be in by June the 4th, and it's got to be Warhammer, and it's got to be about this subject. And you'd be astonished how many people write 4,000 words, get it in by June the 28th, and have written a Warhammer story when it should have been Warhammer 40,000, and then are surprised when they are not selected. And they go, but my story was really good. And their story probably was really good. It's just their ability to read the rules wasn't. And it's like, go back and come try again next time. So be diligent in your research. There is, like all things in life, all the things in life that are worth working towards, you've got to work towards them. And there's no easy, quick fix unless you're J.K. Rowling. No, even then, no, I'm joking. There is no, people like J.K. Rowling or the person who wrote 50 Shades of whatever it is. Do you know, I'd rather write McDonald's Happy Meals. But anyway, but those people are the exceptions that prove the rule. They have, for whatever freak of moment and idea, written the right thing at the right time and been a stupendous success. But for every one of those, there are thousands of people who haven't had that success, even though they might have written something better or more ingenious, or they just. Everybody has to work hard to get to where they are. You've got to put the legwork in, and if you're really good, that legwork won't have to last an enormously long time. But yes, Writers and Artists Yearbook is a good place to go, and conventions if it's comics you're interested in, or checking out the websites of the publishers whose work you like, and looking at their submissions guidelines. Because most of them, if they accept submissions, will publish their guidelines. And then you can do that from anywhere in the world. I like Iceland so much, I'm going, I could live here and write. Because as long as I've got a internet link, So you're not somehow deprived by being, sort of away from the beating hot heart of publishing. It's not like that at all. The world is global. I mean, I spend most of my time sitting in Maidstone in Kent, working for people in Burbank in California, on a comic that's being drawn by a guy in Brazil. Those distances don't matter anymore. It's about the quality of your work and your ability to produce it. So best of luck. Do we have any more? We're reaching. Oh yes. I've outstayed my welcome. We've got time for one more. We've got time for one more question, or we did? Yeah, just one more. Has anybody got? Yes. Oh yes. There we go.
Right.
Better be good. No pressure.
I personally think it is. On the subject of moving between universes.
Yes.
Do you actually try to avoid bleed over, or do you sometimes just have an idea that works in one universe and you realize that you could do something with it in one of your other universes?
Yes. What I would try and avoid, I'm sure I could get away with that quite a lot. Having a brilliant idea for a storyline in Aquaman and going, no one's going to notice if I use this in Warhammer. But I feel that I would, and I would feel bad about that. So I try and craft things deliberately for universes, and then when I'm world building universes also, I go to great lengths to make sure it doesn't feel or sound like something I've done somewhere else before, either in terms of storyline or indeed in terms of terminology. And if I feel it's going in that way, I will work quite hard to avoid that happening. They say there are only so many different stories, but you can do that. When I collect ideas, I told you earlier on, I write ideas down in my notebook. Quite often, a word or a name or an idea, I'll know exactly where I'm going to use it. I'll hear a word and I'll go, oh, that's a name in Aquaman, or that's a Warhammer name, or that's definitely going to be a Marvel idea, or whatever it is. And I almost have filed it in the right category before I use it, so I know where it's going to be channeled. But every now and then I'll have an idea and I'll go, I have no idea where it's going. And I wait until I either realise what I need it for, or indeed I get to that moment where I go, I can't use that idea because I've just used it in Aquaman. What else have I got in my book? Oh, no, and then you fit it in there. I have only, to my knowledge, had one occasion where I had accidental bleed over from one universe to another, and I write in the Gaunt's Ghost book, I invented swear words. They say feth. That's their swear word, feth, sacred feth. And I'd just been writing some Gaunt's Ghosts, and then I switched to a Guardians of the Galaxy comic, and then went back to Gaunt's Ghosts in the course of the same day. And in Guardians of the Galaxy, and this wasn't me, this was Keith Giffen who invented the word, they say flark. And by the end of the day, everybody in the Gaunt universe was saying flark, and everybody in the Guardians of the Galaxy universe was saying feth, and my editor went, why have you done that? And I went, no, I'm sorry, it was just me. So that's the only time where the actual terminology is bled, but usually it keeps very simple. And in fact, I once fell out with a writer that I worked with because he literally said, we were trying to brainstorm an idea for a story, and he said, well, do we do this? And I said, we've just done that in this other thing. And he went, yeah, so? And I went, yep, okay. Clearly, this is not destined to continue because I don't want to do that. There's, even if there is a superficial similarity, I'm sure you could do something much more original with an idea and be excited by it. Otherwise, you're gonna. The only exception to that, I think, would be something like it's something I think Stephen King does particularly well, where if you look at a lot of his novels are about the same components. They're often about writers who are haunted by their own work, usually with some kind of egregore or tulpa that's been created by their work that is stalking them. And after a while, you kind of want to take Stephen King to one side and say, Steve, baby, haven't you written this one already? Except, I think what he's doing is he's exploring all the different variables of a really compelling idea. And you might like some of them more than others, but I think that's a perfectly valid thing to do, and I think that's very exciting. But generally speaking, yes, I will always try and find something new rather than recycling. And sometimes the excitement is to find out just where that homeless orphan idea is going to end up, because I had no idea when I wrote it in my notebook. Right, I've kept you all talking for too long. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for not falling asleep. I've talked for far too long. I'm here tomorrow. Tip your waitress, whatever. Thank you very much indeed.